Hi, this is Cynthia with Kiwi Urban Homestead. Today we're going to have a little update look at the tomatoes that I'm growing as a tomato experiment in buckets in my greenhouse. Just to recap, these tomatoes were originally sown as seed at the beginning of September. They were potted up into these buckets on the 24th of October and today is the 26th of November. So they've been growing in buckets for just over a month. I've got 5 varieties of tomatoes: Moneymaker, Tigerella, Boxcar Willie, Silvery Fir Tree and Roma in these buckets, and I'm growing them in 5 different mixtures of growing mediums. One is straight potting mix, one is straight compost. I have a 50-50 mix of potting mix and compost, a 50-50 mix of compost and topsoil, and finally the bucket half filled with sheep manure and topped up with compost. So today we're going to look and see how each of these is doing. When I first set these up, I had them grouped together, so each type of growing medium, those buckets were together, but I've rearranged them a few days ago, well a week ago actually, so that each variety of tomato is together, so it's easier to see the difference between the one variety and the different growing medium. So let's take a closer look at each group of tomatoes. Due to the confined space in my greenhouse, I'm growing them a lot closer together than I would choose to do in the garden, or even in here if I had more room, but that's just the way it is. Because of this, all the indeterminate, the tall varieties, I'm growing as single cordons, taking out the laterals and just growing them straight up a post in order to conserve space. So I put in some bamboo poles. I decided after I potted them up that rather than insert stakes into the buckets, I'd actually insert the stakes into the ground next to the buckets, which saves any possibility of damaging the roots and also reduces the amount of space needed. Plus, because some of these can grow quite tall, doing the stakes separately means I could put bigger ones in and not worry about them tipping the buckets over. Okay, the first variety we're going to look at is the Moneymakers, these ones at the back here. That first one is growing in the 50% manure and 50% compost, and it's looking pretty healthy. Next along we have just in straight compost, it's a wee bit taller. Thirdly we have the 50-50 compost potting mix one, not quite as big. Next is straight potting mix. Now this one's quite a lot shorter and it's showing some signs of nutrient deficiency. That coloration on the leaves suggests a magnesium deficiency. And lastly, the biggest one is 50-50 compost and topsoil. So that one's looking pretty good. Okay, in front of them we have our Romas. So Romas are a determinate, they don't grow as tall and I'm not staking these. This one is again 50-50 topsoil and compost. The straight potting mix one is again a little bit smaller and again showing some signs of some issues. 50-50 potting mix and compost, not too bad. Few bits of discoloration on the margin of some leaves. Straight compost, to back out a bit to get that one in, it's quite big. And compost and manure mixture, again pretty healthy. We did have a little bit of an issue with the ones that are part manure part compost, so let's just pause and take a quick look at what that was. I've got 2 of these buckets that are 50% manure, 50% compost that just don't seem to be draining. Not sure why, but if you look at this you can see there's a lot of water in there and I haven't watered it since yesterday. And this one's not quite as bad, but again it's not great and you can see that the plant's not very happy. So I'm not sure why this is, but I've got a tent peg that I'm just going to insert a couple of inches into the bottom of the drain holes in each of these buckets and give it a wiggle and just see if whatever's presumably blocking the holes will then let them drain better. Other than because also with the other ones done the same way in these buckets, we don't have that same problem. They're draining just fine. So something a little odd with these two. So I'm going to give them a little bit of help and see what happens. As you can see when I do this, water is just pouring out. Okay, and these ones at the back here are tigerellas. Starting in the corner here we have potting mix and compost combination. Next to it we have a straight potting mix. Again, some leaves not looking quite so happy. A little bit of curling up on the edges of the leaves, a little bit of yellowing. Next along, straight compost. And that is by far the biggest of the tigerellas at this point. The compost topsoil mix, a nice strong healthy plant. And in the corner the manure and compost mix, and as we showed in that last little segment, that had suffered some pretty bad waterlogging, but since we righted that a week ago it's starting to look a lot happier. And along here we have our boxcar willies. This one on the end is 50-50 potting mix and compost. Next to it we have 50-50 compost and topsoil, nice big strong plant. Thirdly, straight potting mix. Again, a slightly smaller plant with some curling of the leaves on the edges. 50-50 sheep manure and compost. And straight compost, which again is the biggest, tallest, strongest plant of that variety so far. Now all of the plants in here don't get perhaps exactly the same amount of sun and light, though I've done my best to distribute them as evenly as I can, but this is another reason for grouping the varieties together, so hopefully each variety is in much the same condition with its brothers than it might be with a different variety due to its position. Lastly, we're going to look at the silvery fir. This is another determinant, so again it's not getting staked. Down the bottom here we have got our 50-50 potting mix and compost, and this is our straight potting mix. This plant is not looking quite so happy. Its leaves are curling up on the edges and the plant isn't as robust. This one here is compost and topsoil mix, looking pretty good. Manure and compost mix, pretty happy. And straight compost. Back up a little bit for that one. Next to it are some tiny tims, but they've got nothing to do with the experiment. With the silvery fir, this one down here has got its first tomato developing. Yum, can't wait for tomatoes. Okay, a few other things about how I'm growing these in the greenhouse. I did intend to put each of them on some sort of tray or saucer underneath to stop the roots going down into the soil. But I've decided that I can't afford all those saucers, etc. So I've decided just to leave them sitting on the soil. So yes, their roots can go down, but since they're all being treated the same, as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't affect the experiment too much. The exception at the moment is the silvery fir that are sitting on these shelves, but I may move those down onto the floor. But otherwise, each variety is at least being treated all the same. Secondly, the conclusions I draw so far, well, the ones in straight compost are overall the biggest, strongest plants so far. The compost topsoil combination seems to be coming second, and the potting mixes all seem to have some sort of deficiency going on. Now if it is magnesium I could treat that, but since this is actually an experiment to see what turns out best, I'm not going to treat it because I want to see what the overall results are in the end, which plants are the biggest and strongest overall, which produce the best results, the most tomatoes by weight out of their varieties. So I'm not going to do that. Also, as I mentioned, these plants are quite close together, so I'm taking out laterals on the indeterminate varieties and training them as a single cordon. And because they're close together, that can allow for reduced air circulation and so potentially more blight problems, so I'm hoping to avoid that. Also, flowers in tomatoes don't require insects to pollinate them. However, they do benefit from either wind shaking them or the buzz of a bumblebee's wings flying past. So being in a greenhouse and not really getting that, I'm giving them some artificial stimulation by shaking the plants, and I will dig out the electric toothbrush I used last year in my greenhouse tomatoes, just applying the toothbrush to the stem where the flowers are and giving it a bit of a buzz every couple of days just helps to increase that vibration, helps the pollen to drop in the flowers and so increase your pollination. which is always a good thing. But of course I will, as always, treat all the plants, at least within the same variety, exactly the same as best I can, so when one gets a buzz or a shake, so do they all. I'm watering the plants every 2 to 3 days, depending on weather conditions. If it's hot and sunny, they need it more often. If we get a few dark, gloomy days, they don't dry out in here quite so much. I have fed the plants twice so far, about 10 days after they were planted, and again last week. I should start doing it a bit more consistently now that they're flowering. So I don't really have conclusions to draw yet, of course, because in the end it's going to come down to production, but I thought you'd like to see how these are getting on a month after planting up in the buckets, and see how it goes. I may do another update in a month or so, and certainly there'll be more updates coming later on.